This is To the Front. Tools for today's top agents.
Maybe you've heard this saying before in your life. Maybe a parent said it to you, a coach, a teacher. Here's the saying: how you practice is how you play, or how you study is how you take the test. You've probably heard this phrase a million times. And I remember the first time I heard it was in T-ball practice. And I remember I was out in the outfield and I was just picking like little daisies and flowers and twirling around. And I remember my coach, I played for the Dodgers in T-ball, and he said this: Adam, how you practice is how you play the game. And I have to sit here and think that, you know what? He's right. That oftentimes some of my best things that I've ever done in life, some of the best messages I've ever given back when I was a pastor, or best businesses that were successful, it really all boiled down to: how did I practice? How did I train? How did I prepare myself? And so in today's episode of To the Front, a podcast episode number 14, we're going to do this in two parts. And part number one is I'm going to lay out some basic groundwork on this topic: how you practice is how you play. And we're going to talk all about how it pertains to hiring new employees and starting new team members in whatever business you're a part of, how you set them up for success and how you help them to practice what you actually want them to do means the world. So let's start on this podcast. I want to give a few really important parts that I've rolled out in businesses that I've been able to lead over the last 15, 16 years. I've rolled them out in church environments. You know what? It's probably even a way that you could do it in your family, because the reality is how people start anything, how they start a new job, how they start a new business, how they meet a first customer, that very first time, how they practice oftentimes is how it's going to play out. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to hit it right out of the park, but you want to get started on the right foot with a new team member, with a new employee. And maybe if you're in your business, you're like, Adam, I can't keep any good help, or I've been through 100 people, or I just can't seem to build great office culture and morale. Number one, that's a problem, go back and watch episode number 13, my podcast guest, Nora Holmes. But if you're saying any of those things, it might be because you're not set up to practice well, but then you expect to play well in the game, in whatever game you're participating in. Now, we're going to take it from the perspective of a new team member. So a new employee, you want to set them up to come into your business structure, to your insurance agency, to whatever it is that you lead. You want them to have an amazing experience right from the first day. Let me give you a couple of tips and tricks that have helped me over the last 15, 16 years build teams that stick around and that perform well. Because I'm not great at a lot of things, but I do feel like I'm pretty good at building a team and keeping a team and helping them to find joy in what they're doing. And so the very first point I was going to say is this: that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. It's the first thing I want to say. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. My dad, over many years of me living, has owned a hair salon, and he called it First Impressions. In fact, my mom came up with that name. And I remember on my dad's business cards when I was in high school, it was the first time I ever noticed that tagline, that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Isn't that true? Isn't every person that you meet, you almost always put them into the box of your first impression of them, or that restaurant that you go to and maybe that meal wasn't that great, and every time now you think about that restaurant, you think about that meal that wasn't fantastic, or that car repair shop, and you went and they just wowed you with their service, and the product was affordable, and now every time a car breaks down, all you can think about is getting it back to that shop. Or if you hear a friend who needs their car fixed, you think about that shop. I'm going to tell you something. The same is true for a new employee. You never get a second chance to make a first impression of your office to that person. So what should you do? You should think about their first day before they get there? Is your place of business, is it clean? Is it organized? Do you have somewhere for that person to do their job? I can't tell you how many insurance agencies or businesses that I talk to, and they're hiring new employees, and the first day that the employee gets there, they don't have any place to be. So what do? They put their purse, they put their coat maybe like on somebody else's desk, or it's sitting in the break room or something, and then they kind of float around for a few days or a week till they get a place to call their own. Well, what would happen is if the first day that they walked in there, they had a place to sit, they had all the technology already in place. You don't need to sit in the IT department. They had a computer, and they had a nice little welcome gift on their desk or at their workstation, or maybe it's a manual labor, more of maybe a warehouse type job, and there was just something sitting there ready for them. That little act of intentionality could make a world of difference, because no, you're not only judging them, they are judging you. And from the very first moment, they're deciding this: how long do I want to work here? In fact, I will tell you, probably within the first couple of days, that employee, that team member has already decided if they want to make a career working for you, or if they want to keep their Indeed profile open. Your goal is to want them to go home on that very first day or the second day and say, you know what, I'm done looking for jobs after 5 p.m. because this is the place I want to be. And to start that off on the right foot, you never get a second chance to make a great first impression. Have a place for them to sit, have their stuff ready, maybe bring in lunch for everybody to welcome that team member. I don't have to tell you of things that you can do, because probably things are already coming to your mind. How can you, in some simple ways, make an amazing first impression? And I got to tell you something. It's not going to happen automatically. It's not. You need to be intentional about it. How does the space look? Do you have something for them? Do you have a plan for their day, or are they just going to sort of float around and not know what to do until somebody pulls them in? You never get a second chance to make a first impression. Now, I want to say this: you don't need to love bomb them. You don't need to give them sweet nothings and praise them and do parades for them. They can see past all of that stuff. Just be really intentional about having a well thought out day and a well thought out space for them, because they will attribute that to, hey, this is a boss, this is an owner, this is a supervisor who really cares about me. If you want to keep great team, make a first impression on that day. The second thing I want to tell you is this: have a training plan before they get there. Now, no matter what field you're in, this is applicable. Whether it's something specialized or something they have to have a degree in, or if it's a job that they're going to come in and learn on the job, it doesn't matter. There needs to be a specific onboarding and training process. Think about what they're thinking about when they walk in. What are they thinking about? When am I going to get paid? How does that work? They're probably thinking about that. What do breaks look like? What's expected of me? What are some goals that you want out of me on this job? The more clarity that you can bring in the first couple of days, and the clearer of a training process that you can create, the better. Remember, the title of this podcast is How You Train is How You Play. And so you have to consider that every one of your new employees, their training, their practicing is the very first thing that they do. And if you want top performing team members, create an amazing atmosphere and an amazing plan for them to train, for them to practice, for them to do whatever they can do, so that when they actually do the thing that you hired them to do, they knock it out of the park. So I remember when I was thinking about this, when I was buying a couple print shops. This is a few years after I was leading the front runner team. I was getting into a field that I've never really done before. I don't know what it means to be a printer or produce apparel or signs or banners or wide format. But I did have a training process that I had used before at Front Runner. In fact, this training process was taught to me by one of my mentors a long time ago, back when I was in church ministry. And to this day, it is the best training sort of scheme that I've ever seen. Now, this can be applied to any field, but what if you adopted sort of this general training plan? And I want to show you, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to see my screen. I'm going to throw up some diagrams of a training process that you could take every one of your team through, that I'm going to tell you will ensure one of two things. Either number one, by the end of that process, your team member will be an all-star and they will be doing exactly what you asked them to do. Or at the end of that process, number two, you will know that they are not the right team member. Right? So one of two things are going to happen, and both are totally valid. Because the worst thing that you want is to have a team member who's kind of halfway performing or not playing as well as you want them to play. When I'm using play, I mean work or deliver. And you don't really know where the process broke down. Well, this gives you a clear path to see in the training process, in the onboarding process, this is where it broke down. Now, if you're listening to this, or if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I'm going to try to illustrate it for you verbally, but you may want to go check it out on YouTube as well. So think about your training process as a box. And that box obviously has four corners. And the goal of training anybody in your office should be to do something called work them around the square. Now, if you're looking at my screen, you can see I've got a big blank square right now. If you're driving in your car listening to this, picture a big square in your mind. And so it doesn't matter what field you're in or what you're training them to do. The number one way that we start to train people is we do the very first bottom left box, and it's called I do, you watch. In other words, I, as the leader, am going to demonstrate what it is that I'm asking you to do. And I don't want you to do anything but watch me. You don't need to contribute. You don't need to do anything. You just watch me. Whatever that is, whether that's selling an insurance app, whether that's servicing a book, whether that is mowing a yard, it doesn't matter. This applies to every single industry, is I do, you watch. And that even means if you're bringing somebody into your company that already knows how to do the thing that you hired them for, you still want to do it and have them watch. Why? It's because you might do it differently than they do. There may be something specific about your process that they don't know. And we should not assume that people know how to do things the way that our company likes to do them. They know how to get the job done, but they may not know how we get that job done. And so that's why this first box is important. I'm going to do it as the leader. I'm going to do it, and you're just going to watch. Now, what does this take? This takes time. If you want people to practice well and to make a great first impression, you have to have somebody on your team who's willing to give of their time. You cannot throw a new team member, a new employee in without your time and expect that they're going to deliver. So what's the first box? I do, you watch. So if you're picturing in your mind, that's a square. The bottom left box just says, I do, you watch. And that just needs to take some time. But what happens is that you have to move them from that to box number two. And I'm gonna load that box number two up. But now think about these boxes, right? They will always go in order. But the time frames might change depending on that type of person, right? But box number two is this: we do together. And that's going to be in the bottom right-hand corner, right? So think of it as I do, you watch. The second is we're going to do it together. So whatever that thing that you're asking them to do, you're going to figure out a way for you to team up and do it as one. Maybe it's going to be a sale point, or it's going to be how you repair a car, or maybe you're a chef or you're a cook and you're hiring somebody and you're going to cook the meal together. Whatever it is, there needs to be a time where you're doing it together. You don't want to just hop over and say, okay, I just did it, now you do it, right? That's still a little bit unfair because you're asking them to be an expert by just watching. Well, guess what? There are multiple ways that people learn. Some people are better visually. Some people are better with putting their hands on it. Some people need to have it written down. So this training process caters to all of those learning styles. So second box, bottom right, is we do it together. Now, this still requires your time, but it should be a place where they start to get their hands on whatever it is you're asking them to do. Now, remember what I said. The time frame is going to be different for all of these. You might be able to move somebody to the second square of the box on the very first day. It just depends on their skill level. But I want to challenge you. Don't put everybody, so to speak, in one box in terms of time. So I will tell you this. Some of the best team members that I have at the businesses that I run are the ones who took the longest to work around the square. Just because somebody works around the square quicker does not indicate that they will be a better employee long term. That's not true. And I see so many people buy into it. And at the end, they're like, well, they started so well, and I don't know why. What happened? Well, oftentimes your slowest adapters will become not only your most loyal, but they will also become the most informed. In fact, I found that the people that seem to get it the fastest don't really get it the fastest. They just know how to sort of BS you into believing that they know what they're doing. So don't be afraid of slower adapters, slower learners, because oftentimes they will be your best team members. Okay, well, the third part of the box is going to be in the top right of the box, if you're listening, is this phrase right here. You do, I watch. So this is a point at which they've watched you, you've done it together. Now you need to let them do, and here's the key for this part. You need to let them mess up. You need to let them mess up right in front of you. Do not stop them. Do not correct them. Be okay if they lose the sale. Be okay if whatever they're doing is not how you would do it or as good as you would do it. Why? Because they need to do it on their own because it builds confidence. But you need to be around. You need to be there for positive and maybe even constructive feedback. But this is real, very important. You do, I watch. This is the first step of releasing your micromanaging. It means that I am going to be okay with how you do it because we've done it together. You've watched me. I've passed off the DNA and the culture of our company. Now I've got to be okay with you growing on your own, but with me still being close for feedback. You have to do that. You do, I watch. So that's the third leg of the square. Very, very important. But in the final leg of the box, maybe you guessed it, top left corner, if you're thinking about it, is you do, I leave. This is the hardest part for managers. This is the hardest part for business owners, is to say, I have now what I call reproduce myself in somebody else. Now, I'm not going to lie. I heard that from my mentor, but I own it for myself. If you want to have a growing business, you have to be good at saying you're going to do it and I'm going to leave. Why? Because that's how businesses scale. Businesses do not scale if everything, every decision, every touch point, every single action has to somehow make its way through you. That is a recipe for failure for your business. Sure, you might be able to do it better than everybody else on your team. In fact, I guarantee you probably know how to do it better. You might, feel like, well, Adam, if I don't do quality control with everything and, if it makes one customer mad, it might spread around the town or whatever it is. That's bull. I'm telling you that's not true. You have to empower your team after you've walked them through a process. I do, you watch. We're going to then do it together. Then you're going to do it, and I'm going to watch. Now I'm going to allow you to do your job, and I am going to leave and get on to the next objective. It doesn't mean that you don't have follow-up meetings. It doesn't mean that you don't check their work sometimes, but it does mean that you're going to give them space to do what you hired them to do. That is a training process that I have put in place my entire life. And I'm telling you, it has worked. And in fact, it should go like this. If you're looking at my screen, I've drawn little arrows from left to right, starting at the bottom left of the box, going to the bottom right, to the top right, and then finally over to the left. This is the training process that should work, and it'll work with any training manual, training curriculum. Sometimes you can do all this stuff in a day or two. Sometimes it might take 3 months. At FrontRunner, it takes our team almost 3 months to work all the way around the square to be able to take care of our customer accounts. Why? Because what we do is really, really hard. And so we want to make sure to set up our team members for success, because how they practice is how they play. And so we're going to slow down so that we know that they do it right, so that we know that they have full confidence. You know what that's produced? That's produced team members that stick around. That's produced team members that don't want to leave. It's produced team members who feel confident in what they are doing. And it's given us a framework for conversation, because we sometimes work team members all the way around this square, and they come back 6 months later and they say, "Hey, Adam, I'm really struggling with this. Can we go back to, corner number 2, which is we do together?" Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do that. Let's do something together, so that we can retrain and get you better equipped. So it gives you a framework for conversation on training. But you know what we do so much? We kind of do it and they watch, or we tell them verbally how to do it. And then all of a sudden we get upset when they don't do it how we want to do it, or they don't know how to do it, or they're slower, or they're lost, or they're struggling. And we've not spent the time to help them to practice well. And we're wondering, why can't I find any good employees? Why can't I find any good team members? Well, I got to say something tough. Maybe the answer to that question is staring at you in the mirror. So it's not that you're a bad business owner or manager, it's just that you don't have a training plan before they get there. You don't have a training sort of ethos, DNA for your office. And then so if you do produce successful team members, it's honestly just by luck. You need it, even if it's not this process, there's got to be some specific coordinated process that your people are going to walk through, so that at the end of that process, they're going to feel very equipped to do what you're asking them to do, and to do it really well. So how you practice is how you play. And so this is the training model that I use for my team. Maybe it'll be helpful for you. Again, just picture a box. If you're listening, bottom left is I'm going to do it. You're going to watch. Second box down to the right is where then we're going to do it together. We're going to then move up and trust you to, you're going to do it. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to let you mess up. Then finally, it's the final box at the top left. You do, I leave, and I'm going to trust you to do the job that I've asked you to do. And this creates a framework for our conversation. If you had a specific, in fact, I have this drawing up in my break room at my print shop. I walk through it virtually with every one of our front runner team members. This is our training model. This is how we're going to train. And I want to tell you something. If you get really good at this, like really, really good at this, the next time you look up, you're going to have a bunch of staff, a bunch of team members who do what you're doing, and they'll probably do it better, right? Because they're gonna have different angles, right? And you've passed off the important parts of the DNA, and now all of a sudden you've got a team that's not just you. It's 2, it's 5, it's 10, it's 20, it's 30, and your revenue is going to grow, right? And you're going to stop working 80 hours a week, and you're going to be able just to work 20 or 30 or 40, and you're going to be more profitable than you've ever been. Why? Because you had a specific process to train people, you deployed them, and now you've reproduced yourself in them. They're doing what you do, which frees up your time, which, by the way, is the only commodity that you can't get more of, is your time. That's why this stuff is so important. That's why it's important that we help our team members practice in a way that we want them to play. So on part number 2 coming at you next week, we're gonna dive into our last point, which is this: make their first big win easy. Make their first big win easy. And this is going to specifically focus in the captive insurance realm. So it's going to be an episode you do not want to miss, because we're going to help them to get their first big win really, really easy. All right, that's it for episode number 14 of To the Front. We're so glad that you've joined us. Make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, you go subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you're on those, go check us out on YouTube. We are grateful that you're along for the journey, because we want to give tools for tomorrow's top agents, insurance agents, top business owners, top whatever field that you're coming from. We want to give you tools to do it better. And that's the hope of this podcast. So until episode number 15, take care, and we'll see you then.